Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Daily Challenge. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Tuesday afternoon. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, as I'm smacking my microphone, let us know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. Today is all about interactive buttons, and we're going to be diving into component states and, to kick it up a notch, Lottie animations. All right, let's go ahead and hop over to my screen. Boop. If you want information about the daily challenges or the creative challenges, head on over to behance.net/challenge/XD. You can get all the information about not just this challenge, but all the challenges. Hit the big blue button at the top so you're notified when new challenges are released. Every single day, you're going to receive a challenge. This week is a 1-week challenge. Sometimes we do 2-week challenges of all sorts of different applications. Join us in our community chat on Discord. You can watch our live shows daily, not just challenges, but also wonderful things. InDesign was just up just a few moments ago, which is amazing. And then you can share your work. Now, we started off yesterday. Now, yesterday's stream was a pre-recording. I was going through a minor medical procedure, doing okay now. You can rewatch the video. I think there was a little bit of a technical issue at the beginning of the video. You can definitely rewatch it there. And today we're diving into, like I mentioned, animated interactive buttons. And if you want to go back on some of the older challenges, if you scroll down, down, and down, and down, and down, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of challenges that you can go through, which is super cool. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and hop over to Adobe XD, and this is the template for today. So I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in, add interactions to your buttons using Auto-Animate and Lottie files. Down here we have some inspiration. We're gonna be kind of riffing off some of these ideas. Essentially, you can hover over a button, something might happen. You can click on the button, maybe an animation will start running, and then it'll automatically transition back to another state. All right, little resource booklet down here. And then in my challenges recently, I've been including a tips section. Now this one, you can launch the preview here and you can click on this button and you can watch a video all about Lottie animations, which is super cool if you want to take that to the next level. All right. Rob is asking, I hope you're well. I am now. I had an epidural steroid injection for my severe sciatica, and I've had one before and it went okay, but yesterday they hit a nerve while they were in there. Whew, yesterday was not fun. Not fun, but doing much better today. Thanks for asking. All right, let's go ahead and start with our button. We're gonna start with an upload button, and just to give you a bit of a preview of what we're gonna be diving into is on Dribbble, I did release this one, and you can download this as well, not too long ago, and we're going to be doing something very similar, almost identical to that. All right, so we're going to start by changing the artboard color. So I'm going to dive in and just set a fill, and of course, you know, if you're working with a very specific design, then definitely change it to your liking, but I love the light blue, something in this area here, just very peaceful and nice, right? Happy little colors. Now, we want the actual shape of our button. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my good old rectangle tool and draw one out. Now I'm going to make this button quite large, just for informational purposes so we can see it really nicely. But of course, if you're working with a design system or you're designing for a specific device like an iPhone, an Android, a desktop, whatever it might be, then you might have to kind of confine your button based on that. But you can always resize later. All right, I'm gonna round out those corners completely. Now, some buttons are nice and, you know, somewhat rounded, some are nice and sharp, but I'm gonna go ahead and go completely round. And then for the fill, if you've been watching my streams, you know I'm a big fan of blurple. I love that word. It's a great color. It's like a bluish purple. It's wonderful. Josh says I had severe sciatica too, ended up needing a few surgeries. Yeah, I don't want to go down the surgery route, but at this point I mean, dealing with it for so long, it's getting worse and worse. It's not fun. It is not fun. I'm glad hopefully you're doing better, Joshua. All right, I'm gonna grab my text tool and type out the word upload. Now, in terms of the typeface and the color, we definitely want a nice amount of contrast. So I'm gonna switch this over to white. I'm going to resize it up a little bit. I do wanna leave a little bit of room on the right-hand side for the actual icon that we're gonna be adding in just a moment. Now, if I switch this over to, let's keep it simple. Of course, we could keep it at Helvetica or something, but maybe Astoria Sans is always nice. And since this is probably going to be a main call to action, we're going to bump up the weight to maybe about bold. Ooh, I don't know. Is that too bold? Maybe. Medium. Let's try that. It could work. Maybe I'll bump it up a little bit more. Now, I'm going to reposition this in a moment, but over here on the left-hand side, we're going to want that icon, which is also going to enlarge when we get to our hover. So I'm going to grab my ellipse tool this time, draw one out. I'm going to sample this blurple color. Love that word. But I'm going to shift the color a little bit so it's a little bit lighter, somewhere in this area here, possibly. Maybe right about there, right? And then on the inside of this, we want an icon of some sort. Now, if I hop over to my plugins down at the bottom, I can dive into the Icons for Design plugin and look up something like maybe Upload. There's a few nice icons here. This one from Feather is quite nice, so I'm going to click on that. It's going to pop it on in here. Now, to match our text over to the right, I'm going to change the color. And I want to dive in and make sure that all of these pieces are separate. At least, this piece up here and then this piece down here, because when we do animate this and create a hover effect, we're actually going to shift it around just a little bit, right? Now to start, I might want it a little bit larger. Now this is a border-based icon, which is great, so I can just bump up the weight and size a little bit. And I think we're getting somewhere, right? All right. That's looking pretty good. Again, I'm designing it purposely a little bit larger, but of course, feel free to make it smaller if you need to. So we have our first state essentially set up and ready to go. Now, at this point, we want to convert this into a component, not just so that we can use it all across our project, but also so that we can very easily create different states and then animate between them. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of this. And I do see a question from Rob about the pressure point stuff. I'm going to take a look at some of this stuff after the stream, but I've done like physical therapy. I've done all these different treatments, and it hasn't been fun. It has not been fun. So I went ahead and selected all of this information, and I'm going to turn this into a component. You can do that either within your Properties Inspector over to the right where the plus button is, over in your Document Assets, this plus button over here, or the Command or Control K shortcut. It helps if I press the right plus button, right? I press the plus button with character styles, which is also good because I would definitely want to save my character styles, but I'll want to press the plus button beside components. Boop, there we go. And now we have our component. And this is the main component as indicated by the solid diamond at the top left-hand corner. And now what we want to do, now that everything is set up for the first state, we want to create our second. And this one is going to be our hover state. So over within the Properties Inspector, I'm going to press that plus button one more time and create a hover state. And it's going to be wired up by default as indicated by the lightning icon to the right. Now I can dive in. I can dive in and make some changes. Now for the hover state, I want to keep it very simple. I don't want anything too crazy. I want a nice subtle hover. So I'm going to dive in. Maybe I'll select this circle, enlarge it just a little bit. And then I might want to select this, maybe enlarge this a little bit as well. I'm going to move these maybe up and down a touch, something to that effect, right? And I might want to go back to my default state and just select this icon and turn off responsive resize. When you are working with elements that are vector-based, sometimes responsive resize, especially if there are multiple parts to it, it gets a little bit funky. It tries to move things around and you might not exactly want that for certain icons. And it'll push those changes to these guys over here, right? So we've gone ahead and we dove in, made some changes, enlarged some things, moved some things around. So now if I go back to my default state and press the play button at the top, I can now hover. And we have a relatively subtle, I'd probably dial this back just a little bit, but we have a relatively subtle hover effect, right? Which is more or less what we wanted. And that looks pretty good. Now, what we want in this point is we want to be able to click or tap on this button from the hover state and then transition to another state that will display a Lottie animation, right? Now, Where do you get a Lottie animation? Lots of places you can get a Lottie animation. If you do have one in Finder or Explorer, you can very easily just drag one in, and I might show you that in a second. But what you can also do is hop into your plugins, and there is an official Lottie Files plugin. If you don't have that, definitely hit the plus button at the top. You'll be able to search for it and install it. And when you dive into the Lottie Files plugin, you can search for basically whatever you're looking for, and all the ones that will appear in this search will be free to use in your project, which is amazing. So you can type out something like upload, or since uploading is the opposite of downloading, you can also search for a downloading file and just basically flip it upside down. So we have some pretty cool Lottie animations, right, that you can definitely drag into your project like that. Now, one thing I'll mention, there's a few things actually to mention about this particular Lottie animation that I just dragged in. You can't see it, right? And that's because this one in particular, if you take a look at the preview to the left, starts out blank, and that's purposely in this particular animation. It'll restart, there it goes, right? So when I go ahead and press play, it will launch and you'll be able to see it, right? So definitely keep that in mind. The second thing to keep in mind is that what you see in this panel to the left is what you get. So in this particular case, you're going to get a blue kind of loading circle, and then there's the green acceptance state at the end. Now that might be great in some examples, but for this one it's just not going to work because we don't want that blue on top of the purple. It's going to look a bit funky, right? So what you can do if you do find a Lottie animation that you really like, if you hop over to your browser and you go to lottiefiles.com, right? You can also search the same Lottie files here. You can also search premium ones as well. But if you find one that you really like this one over here, but the colors just aren't exactly what you're looking for, right down here at the bottom, you can actually edit the layer colors of your Lottie animations in here, right? As long as they're vector based, which most of them are. So I can dive in here and over to the right on Lottie, if you go to edit.lottiefiles.com, you'll be able to get here as well. But I can just change this to white maybe. I can change this to white and update, and now we have a white Lottie animation, which is great, right? And now there are two ways to actually get this out of the editor. You can either export it right here at the top, which will download to your computer, or you can upload it to preview, right? And what's really cool about this is this will sync back to your Lottie Files plugin. So if I go ahead and choose a project, I can choose my private animations because I don't want to be re-uploading these particular edits to the web because they're not mine to begin with. I just want to make some changes to use in my projects. So I can upload it to my private animations and select. It's going to upload, as you can see down here at the bottom. And then if I hop back over to Adobe XD, it might take a second or two, but this tab over here at the top will bring me to my animations. And I'm going to be covering this in the future, but you can also upload animations from After Effects directly to your Lottie Files plugin as well. And this, I believe, should be that Lottie animation that I just created. I can go ahead and insert it in just a moment, but I want to make sure that I'm inserting it into not just the hover state, but also the state we're going to create in just a second, right? So I'm going to dive in here. I'm going to insert this as a Lottie animation. I'll pop it right about here, right? Now I don't want it to be seen in this particular state, so I'm going to make sure to just drop the opacity to about 0, right? And I don't want it to play automatically. I want no playback in this case. So we have our Lottie animation in our hover state, but now what we want is we want to create another state where this animation is actually going to play. So I'm going to press the plus button, create a new state, and I'll call this uploading. And now essentially what we want is we want to be able to collapse this so that we only focus on that Lottie animation. So I'm going to grab this circle, I'm going to grab the icon and the Lottie animation. Maybe I'll move it to the center. I will move the upload text to the center as well. In this case, it hides perfectly behind this circle. If it doesn't, you can always maybe drop the opacity or mask it away or something like that. And then I'm going to shrink this down as well, right? Now for this icon here, we don't want this to be seen, right? So maybe I'll just have a little bit of fun. I'll move this up, I'll move this down, and I'll drop the opacity of the entire icon to 0. And then I'll want to make sure that the Lottie animation that we added in the hover state is set to play automatically. Now, this icon over to the left will control looping of the playback of the Lottie animation. And in some cases, you will absolutely want that to be turned on. But in this particular case, we do not. Not only because we don't want it to just continuously loop and loop and loop and upload forever, but we want to be able to transition automatically from this state to another state we're going to create in a second after this animation is complete. And if looping is turned on, it's never going to complete, right? So we're going to keep it turned off. All right, so with that done, we have our hover state and we have our uploading state. And just to show you what this would look like, if I press play, helps if I turn it. I did turn it to play automatically. Okay. Where is it? Oh, also helps if I increase the opacity to 100%. That helps, right? And there it is. Now I might want to make this a little bit larger. Now, another thing I'll probably point out is in the previews, as you can see here, the previews of many of these Lottie animations are essentially bitmaps, right? So when you enlarge them, they're going to naturally get pixelated. But the actual contents of the Lottie animation are completely vector, right? So it looks nice and crisp. Ooh, look at that. That's fancy. That's going to work, right? So what we want to do now is we want to make sure that we can wire up our hover state to that uploading state. So from this state over here, as you can see, I have selected on the right-hand side, I'm going to switch over to prototype mode. Now, when you're in prototype mode, what you want to do is you want to select the object that will trigger the interaction. Now, for a button like this, we could get specific and maybe have this particular circle trigger the interaction or the icon, but honestly, most buttons, the whole thing should be able to trigger the interaction, right? So I'm going to select the entire component. I'm going to click on the blue handle to the right, and that will allow me to set up an interaction between the different states of this component. So I'm going to do, make sure it's a tap trigger, right? Now, as for the type, we could do a transition, which will just basically cut to the next state. But we went through all that process of moving things around, resizing, shifting, the text behind the circle. So we're going to want Auto-Animate. So it's a nice, smooth animation. And we're going to make sure to choose our uploading state. And in terms of the easing options, ease in, ease out might work. But what we want to do is we want the Lottie animation to kick off basically right as the shrinking takes place. Now, if we have anything that contains an ease out, there'll be a little bit of a slowdown at the end, which will kind of delay the start of the Lottie animation. So we might just want ease in, right? So it's a bit slower at the beginning, but then when it gets to the end, the animation should kick off pretty quickly, right? So I'm gonna go back to my default state and launch the preview. And now we have our hover, right? And now I can click and there it goes. So did you see how the animation kicked off pretty quickly, right? If I were to switch this back over to, let's say, ease in out, I mean, it's not bad, but there was a little bit more of a delay at the end. We could do something like snap as well, which would probably delay it even more, but still not bad, right? And it has a kind of a nice snap down. Now, if you increase it to maybe 0.6, probably a little bit too much, right? Probably don't want that. So I'm going to keep it around 0.4. Let's go back to ease in. We want to make sure that we keep these interactions fairly quick. We don't want users waiting around too long. I mean, they're already waiting around for the animation to complete, right? But in terms of the intermittent steps, going from default state to hover to uploading, we want those pretty quickly, right? All right, so we've gone ahead and done our uploading state. But as you saw, once it gets to the end of that animation, it just kind of sits there. So what we're going to want is we're going to want one more state that's essentially the complete state. So I'm going to go into design mode and I'm going to press the plus button. Actually, let's go ahead and press the plus button from our default state, just so we don't have to resize everything one more time. And we're going to dive in here and maybe we probably don't need the icon. So I'm going to keep that at 0. We may not need this either, so I'll maybe drop that to 0. The text we're going to change to say complete. And, often in design, colors are used to indicate whether something is complete or you run into an error or anything like that. So in this case, because this will be the complete state, you might want to change this to something like a green. Now, accessibility time, right? This color here, this green against the white, it's just not gonna work, right? And I can, assuming it works today, it wasn't working the other day, but I can hop into, let's say, the Stark plugin and go into contrast, and you're noticing right now, right? I don't think it's picking up the right colors, but it's not passing anything, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and just tweak this green to make it a little bit darker, bring out some of the saturation a little bit, just so that there's a little bit more contrast back there. Right? It definitely still isn't perfect, and this, for some reason, is still not picking up the right colors. It's not showing the green back there, but it is better in this particular case, right? So we have our uploading, we have our complete, and now what we want to make sure that we can transition automatically from our uploading state when that animation completes to the complete state. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to hop into prototype mode. And then in this case, you're probably noticing that we have our time trigger from our Lottie animation already set up, but we want to create an additional interaction. So I'm going to go ahead and press the plus button. And then over within the properties inspector, we don't want to tap in this case. We want to switch this over to end of playback, which works on Lottie animations and videos. And essentially, it's going to tell Adobe XD that when the playback of whatever media you have selected completes and looping is not turned on, like I mentioned before, it's going to perform the action down below. So if I've chosen end of playback, and then down below we want to choose the action. Now in this case, because there will be things that are moving, Auto-Animate should work great, and we're going to choose our complete state. And we'll do the same thing. We'll try ease in with about 0.2 seconds for that animation, right? So if I go back to our default state, let's see this all in action. I can hover, right? I can tap. The animation's going to kick off, and when it gets to the end, it automatically transitions to that complete state. Now we can complete the cycle if we wanted to, and go to our complete state, and maybe just set up a very simple tap trigger going back to our default state. Now, because in this case, there probably won't be much that we need to animate, you can make an argument that the little circle on the left, we could potentially animate, but I'm going to switch it over to a simple transition, maybe a little bit of a dissolve. Let's see what that looks like. Not too bad, or we can just have it cut. Right? And there we go. We can complete the cycle one more time. Animation, and then complete. Pretty fancy. And what's great is all of this is built into a single component. So you can use this basically anywhere in your project. So if you have a bunch of them all over the place on different artboards or whatever it might be, and you need to make some changes to either the color or the text or whatever it might be, you just have to dive in, update one of them, and it's going to push those changes. And it's also going to push the changes to the states. And this is pretty ugly, this purple on the blue, but it also pushes the changes to the states within that component. So the hover state was updated. The uploading state, if I were to move this around, right, that color would be updated as well, which is great. And of course, if you change the Lottie animation on the main component, that updates as well, which is great. Now let's do one more very, very quick example. I might want a heart, so I'm going to draw a polygon. And you're probably wondering, why are you drawing a polygon? Some of you might know where I'm going with this. But in the properties inspector, let me just change this color. Actually, you know what? I'm going to leave a simple border, right? In the properties inspector with a polygon selected, if I enter less than 3 and press return, fancy, right? So I might want, in this case, a very simple heart that when someone taps on this, it's going to explode. And there's confetti all over the place, right? So I'm going to go ahead and create a component, Command and Control K. And then on this state, we really don't want anything, right? But on the next state, let's do a toggle state actually. On the next state, we want to fill this heart in. We'll do a nice, you know what, let's stick with our blurple. Why not, right? You don't want the border, but what we might want is we might want confetti exploding behind this heart. So back over to my Lottie Files plugin. I'm going to search confetti. And we'll do something like this. This looks pretty fancy. Probably don't want this that big. But let's play it very quickly and see what that, ooh, look at that, fancy. I'm going to make sure it is behind the heart. And on this state in particular, I do want it to play automatically, right? So from my default state, we did choose a toggle state. That's what I was trying to get at. So it was automatically wired up. So I'm going to press the play button and pew. Now, very similar to hover, when you add a toggle state, it automatically wires up with Auto-Animate. In this case, we probably don't need that. So we're going to switch it over to a simple transition with no animation. And now, pew. Why not, right? Not the most practical thing in the world, but it's kind of fun to add a little bit of subtle animation to your interactions. Of course, find the right animation that works. I wouldn't say that this one is the best one, but it gives you an idea of what you can possibly do. And I would love to see what you do, right? Definitely post it in Discord so we can take a look. Post it on Twitter, post it on Behance, post it on all the different places. Let us know, and I will be back tomorrow with challenge number 3. Thanks so much, everyone.